Usually when we talk about like a medical diagnosis or maybe solving some sort of structural problem in a building, there is this, I guess, this underlying expectation of absolute precision.
Right. We want exact answers.
Exactly. We're totally conditioned to look for binary answers. Like you break your arm, the X-ray shows that that jagged white line against the dark background, and the doctor just points to the screen and says, well, there it is. That's the problem.
Yeah, it's very clean, very objective.
It is a completely objective, observable reality.
It's comforting, honestly. I mean, we are a species that deeply appreciates having things, visible and categorized. We want things clearly defined without any lingering ambiguity.
Oh, for sure. But then you step out of that realm, out of modern diagnostics, and into the world of ancient texts or classical literature or, religious scripture, and suddenly that X-ray machine is completely useless.
Yeah, it doesn't work at all.
Right. We find ourselves staring at a textual landscape that is incredibly murky. And I am sure you, the listener, have experienced this exact thing. Have you ever been reading a really complex text? Maybe a dense legal document or like a classic novel you were assigned in college or an ancient scripture, and found what looks like a massive, glaring contradiction right there on page 2.
Oh, it happens all the time.
You pause, you reread the paragraph, and you think, wait a minute, didn't the author just say the exact opposite of this like 3 paragraphs ago?
Right. It's the absolute definition of textual muddy waters. And navigating those waters requires a completely different set of diagnostic tools than what we'd use for, say, a spreadsheet or an engineering manual.
Definitely.
Because when we encounter those moments of friction in an ancient text, our modern instinct is often to just, throw our hands up, declare the text flawed, and just walk away.
Totally. We just bail on it. But today's deep dive is all about what happens when we resist that urge. What happens when we stop, put the book down, and actually examine those apparent contradictions rather than just skimming past them in confusion or, dismissing them outright.
We're basically taking a journey into the architecture of argumentation.
Exactly. Textual defense. And our source material today is a highly analytical book called Misconceptions About the Quran, or Shubhat al-Quran in Arabic, written by Dr. Muhammad Amara.
And we should clarify our parameters here.
Yes, our mission today is very specific. We are exclusively focusing on the first third of this text. So we're just looking closely at how Dr. Amara deconstructs 3 specific logical puzzles that critics have raised regarding the Quran.
Right. And before we delve into the mechanics of these puzzles, we really need to establish a very clear framework for our approach today.
Good point. Lay it out.
So we are acting as your objective analytical guides to Dr. Amara's arguments. We're not taking sides.
Right. No sides.
We are not endorsing any specific theology, and we are not arguing for or against the religious claims of the source text. Our goal is purely intellectual. We want to explore the linguistic, historical, and logical arguments the author uses to defend the internal consistency of the text. We're just examining the internal machinery of the arguments.
I like to think of us as mechanics, right? Looking under the hood of a very old, incredibly complex engine.
That's a great way to put it.
We aren't here to tell you if the car is the best car ever made. We're just here to see how the gears are supposed to turn according to the engineers who built it and, the mechanics who have maintained it over the centuries.
Exactly. And to understand how Dr. Amara resolves the specific puzzles in the text, we first have to understand his underlying philosophy about why these puzzles, or, these misconceptions, even exist in the public sphere to begin with.
Because he doesn't view them as accidents, right?
No, not at all. He views them as an inevitability. Dr. Amara's introduction is foundational because he introduces a concept using the Arabic term tadafu fikri.
Tadafu fikri. And what does that translate to?
It roughly translates to intellectual pushing or intellectual contention. He argues that the questions, the doubts, and the misconceptions raised by critics are not a threat to a belief system.
Wait, really?
Not a threat, right. He views this contention between different ideas, this constant friction across human history and across civilizations, as a necessary historical law, a law that actually drives intellectual progress.
So the very act of someone pointing at a text and saying, well, this doesn't make sense, or this is a contradiction, is not a bug in the system of human philosophy.
No, it's a feature.
It's a feature. It's the engine of refinement.
Exactly. Dr. Amara posits that without these intellectual challengers, whether they are, sincere skeptics or hostile critics or just curious observers, a community's collective mind becomes lazy.
It gets complacent.
It becomes dull, yeah. If a society never has to defend what it believes, the individuals within that society gradually forget why they believe it in the first place.
Oh, that makes total sense. They just inherit doctrines as mere cultural artifacts rather than like living, breathing philosophies.
Precisely. The defense of the truth, in his view, is actually what clarifies and sharpens the truth for the next generation.
I am thinking about this in terms of biological systems. Like, it is remarkably similar to the human immune system,
Oh, yeah. The immune system is a perfect parallel.
or even the concept of muscle hypertrophy. Like, you cannot build strong muscles without the physical resistance of lifting a heavy weight, right?
Yeah.
You have to tear the muscle fibers so they rebuild stronger.
Right, you need that stress.
And an immune system requires exposure to actual pathogens to build up the necessary antibodies. If you keep an intellectual framework or belief system in a completely sterile bubble, where it never faces the germs of doubt or the friction of a misconception, it becomes incredibly fragile.
It really does.
The second it steps outside that echo chamber, it just collapses under the slightest scrutiny.
And taking that biological analogy further, Dr. O'Mara points out that the Quran itself does not behave like a sterile bubble. It actually models this exact behavior of welcoming the pathogen.
How so?
Well, it does not shy away from the arguments of its opponents in 7th century Arabia. It doesn't censor them or pretend they don't exist. It actively quotes them.
That is wild to me.
Yeah, it documents the insults, the skepticism, and the alternative theories of the people who vehemently opposed it.
So the text is permanently preserving the arguments used against its own legitimacy. That is just a fascinating rhetorical choice. I mean, if I were writing a manifesto, I would probably want to leave out the part where my critics called me crazy.
Right, a fragile text would certainly omit those critiques, but by preserving them, the text actively engages with them. Dr. Amara cites verses where the Quran explicitly demands empirical proof from its opponent.
Oh, like a challenge.
Yes, it uses phrasing like, bring your proof if you are truthful, or it asks if the critics have any remnant of knowledge or a prior book to back up their claims.
It is essentially demanding a cited bibliography for their skepticism.
That's exactly what it's doing, and Dr. Amara contrasts this with the strategy of the text's opponents at the time. According to the historical context preserved in the text, those opponents simply told their followers to plug their ears and make loud noises so they wouldn't hear the recitation at all.
Oh, wow. So they opted for the sterile bubble.
Exactly, they wanted the echo chamber. So the author is framing this entire book, this deep dive into the first third of his material on misconceptions, not as a panicked defensive scramble, but as the continuation of a core intellectual tradition.
This connects so perfectly to how you, the listener, and all of us handle the modern absolute flood of information. Like, we have curated feeds, algorithmic echo chambers, and the ability to just block anyone who disagrees with us.
It's so easy to isolate ourselves now.
We can live our entire digital lives without ever experiencing that tadafu fikri. But when we do encounter an argument that rubs us the wrong way, we have a choice. Do we retreat, or do we use that friction to test the structural integrity of our own ideas?
And this mindset of actively seeking out the friction points sets up Dr. Amara's first major case study perfectly.
Right. We are moving from the abstract philosophy of contention into a very specific physical puzzle.
And it involves what looks like a massive, glaring biological contradiction scattered across different chapters of the text regarding the creation of human beings.
That's a wild one. Let's get into it.
So this is a puzzle that critics have pointed to for centuries, because when you lay all the verses out flat on a table, the text appears to give a completely chaotic, contradictory list of what human beings are actually made from.
Yeah, let me list the materials for you, the listener. Because if you read sequentially through the text, one verse says humans are made from nothingness, another chapter says dust.
Right.
Then you turn a few pages and it says humans are made from water. Then it says clay, then sticky mud, then altered black mud, then a term translated as sounding clay.
It's a lot of earth materials.
But then in completely different sections of the text, it abandons the earth imagery entirely and says humans are made from a drop of fluid-like sperm or mixed fluids, and then a clinging blood clot, and then a chewed lump of flesh.
Sounds totally disparate.
A logical reader looks at this and asks, how can all of these mutually exclusive materials be the origin of humans at the exact same time? Like, are we made of water or are we made of dust? Is it sticky mud or is it a biological embryo?
And it is a perfectly reasonable question. I mean, if an engineering manual told you to build a bridge out of steel on page 10 and then out of wet mud on page 20, you would fire the engineer.
Exactly.
Yep.
You'd want your money back.
So Dr. Amara resolves this by applying a very rigorous methodological filter. He argues that the reader is experiencing a category error.
A category error, okay?
Yeah, this is not a contradiction of substance, it is a chronological timeline, and crucially, it is split into two entirely distinct categories of creation that the critic has improperly smashed together.
So we are dealing with two completely separate events. So category A and category B?
Precisely. Category A represents the singular creation of the very first human prototype, Adam. And category B represents the biological reproduction of all subsequent human descendants.
Oh, I see.
If you mix the two categories, you get a chaotic mess. If you separate them and read them chronologically, you get a highly specific, sequential manufacturing process.
Okay, let's isolate category A then, the creation of the first human prototype. If we remove all the embryological terms, what does the timeline of the Earth materials actually look like?
Well, Dr. Amara traces the linguistic progression straight from the Arabic vocabulary used in the text. It begins at absolute zero. The text says humans were not a thing. They existed only as a concept in divine knowledge, entirely non-existent in the physical realm.
Basically the blank canvas before the artist even picks up a brush.
Right. Then, the first physical elements introduced are base materials. The text mentions dust or soil. Following that, it mentions water. Now, when you introduce water to dust, the physical properties change.
Right, you get mud.
Exactly. The Arabic word used in the text at this stage is teen, which translates directly to mud. So, dust plus water equals mud. That's the initial mixture. But the timeline does not stop there.
Okay, so time passes in the narrative.
Yes. As the water within that mud begins to settle and evaporate, the consistency changes. The text introduces a new term, lizib. This translates to sticky mud, or a highly cohesive, viscous mud that clings to itself.
Ah, so the text is describing a very literal drawing process. The water is evaporating and it's leaving a denser material behind.
Yes, and it becomes even more specific. As the sticky mud sits and ages over a long period, it undergoes a chemical or environmental alteration. It darkens in color and changes in odor.
Really? It mentions the smell.
Well, the text utilizes the term hama maznoon. Dr. Amara explains that this translates to altered black mud. It specifically refers to mud that has stagnated, changed over time, and become dark and pungent.
That is an incredibly visceral detail.
Oh.
A stinking, stagnant black mud.
It's very vivid.
It is not the sanitized, glowing, magical origin story one might expect from a religious text. It feels grounded in very raw physical reality.
It is deeply sensory. And the final physical stage before any concept of life or a soul is introduced is described using the word salsal.
Salsa.
Yes. This is often translated as sounding clay. It refers to mud that has completely dried out, and classically, commentators note it means dried by the sun or wind, without the use of a kiln or fire, to the point where it becomes hollow and brittle.
So it's totally baked by the sun.
Right. And if you were to strike it with your hand, it would ring or make a sound, much like dry, unbaked pottery.
Hence the term sounding clay.
Exactly. And only after this entire sequence is complete nothingness, dust, water, mud, sticky mud, altered black mud, sounding clay, does the text mention the divine spirit being breathed into the physical form.
Wow. You know, thinking about this in terms of a modern manufacturing process or like a recipe clarifies it completely. Imagine you have a famous, complex family cake recipe. If you ask 3 different people in your family what the cake is made of, depending on the exact moment you ask them, you will receive 3 completely different answers.
Right, depending on where they are in the kitchen.
Exactly. One person, pulling ingredients from the pantry, says, "Oh, it is made of flour and water." Another person, who is currently running the stand mixer, says it is made of a sticky batter. And the third person, pulling the final product out of the oven, says it is a baked sponge.
That's a perfect analogy.
They are not contradicting each other at all. They are just taking descriptive snapshots at different points along a single chronological timeline.
And that mechanism of sequential snapshots is exactly what Dr. Amara is highlighting. And this exact same logic applies to Category B, the descendants of that first human prototype.
Because once the prototype is complete, the manufacturing process shifts entirely. We are no longer dealing with sounding clay.
No, for the descendants, the text outlines a purely embryological sequence.
Okay, let's trace that sequence.
It starts with the term nutfa amshaj, which refers to a drop of mixed fluids, indicating the necessary combination of male and female genetic material. The timeline then progresses to alaka. Linguistically, this translates to a clinging clot or something that hangs and attaches itself. much like a leech.
Which, if you think about it, maps remarkably well onto the concept of a fertilized embryo implanting and attaching itself to the uterine wall to draw nutrients.
It does. And the next stage is described as mudga, which the text characterizes as a chewed-like lump of flesh.
Chewed-like.
Yes, having the appearance of something chewed. From there, the text states that bones are formed, and finally, those bones are clothed in flesh and muscle before the entity becomes a new creation, culminating in a fully formed infant.
Okay, so if I'm reading this text and I see dust in Chapter 3 and clinging clot in Chapter 20, my modern post-Enlightenment brain immediately categorizes this as a failure of editing.
We want everything in a neat little box.
We are so conditioned to expect a wiki-style synthesis. If this is all one neat, sequential timeline, Category A for Adam, Category B for us, why does the author scatter these stages across different chapters?
That's the real question.
Right. Why not just write one clear, bulleted paragraph in the opening chapter that lays out the entire 8-step process from dust to embryo? Why force the reader to piece it together like a jigsaw puzzle?
Well, this brings us to a fundamental misunderstanding of the genre of the text itself. The Quran is not a biological textbook or a linear encyclopedia. It is a rhetorical, persuasive, and spiritual document.
Okay.
Dr. Amara, drawing heavily on classical tafsir, which is the tradition of Quranic exegesis, explains that different contexts within the text require completely different rhetorical emphasis.
How does scattering the timelines serve a rhetorical purpose, though?
Consider the psychological state of the intended audience in a specific chapter. If a particular section of the text is addressing human arrogance, perhaps dealing with wealthy or powerful individuals acting haughtily, the text will intentionally pull the snapshot of dust or a despised drop of fluid.
Oh, I see.
The rhetorical point is to puncture the ego. The message is, do not walk on the earth with such arrogance. Remember the base, humble dirt you originate from.
So the choice of material is tailored to the emotional lesson of the chapter.
Exactly. Conversely, if the context of a different chapter is about marveling at the intricate design of the universe and the artistic power of the creator, the text might reference sounding clay or the complex embryological stages.
To evoke the image of a master artisan.
Right, crafting a brilliant, complex vessel. The specific term from the timeline is selected for its emotional and spiritual resonance in that exact moment, not for the sake of scientific cataloging.
That makes a lot of sense.
And Dr. Amara finds it profound that even though these snapshots are scattered purely for these rhetorical effects, when a reader does compile them, they align chronologically without breaking the physical logic of either the clay or the embryonic progression.
So what appears to be a contradiction is actually a failure on the reader's part to assemble the timeline and understand the rhetorical context.
Exactly.
We're looking at scattered pieces of a mosaic and complaining that they don't form a linear painting. You really have to step back and look at the whole wall.
And the timeline is the key that unlocks that first puzzle. But while this first case study was about mapping out a physical, biological progression, our second puzzle requires us to map out a psychological and cognitive timeline.
Right, we are moving from the physical creation of human beings to how those conscious human beings actually search for meaning.
Yes.
This second case study revolves around the prophet Abraham. And this puzzle strikes the very core, the absolute bedrock of monotheistic theology.
It really does. It is a narrative that, on a surface reading, presents a terrifying theological problem for the text.
Let me set the parameters of this problem for you, the listener.
Yeah.
The Quran explicitly states, across dozens of chapters, that associating partners with God, the act of polytheism, known as shirk in Arabic, is the ultimate unforgivable sin.
It is the ultimate line in the sand.
It is the one definitive line a believer cannot cross. Yet this exact same text contains a detailed story about Abraham, who was revered as the great patriarch of monotheism.
The icon of monotheism, really.
And in this story, Abraham is standing under the night sky. He looks up at a bright star and says, clearly and explicitly, "This is my Lord."
A direct declaration of celestial worship.
Then the star sets, and Abraham says, "I love not fading things." Later, the moon rises. He points to the moon and says, "This is my Lord." The moon sets, and he rejects it too. Finally, the sun rises, the largest and most dominant object in the sky. He says, "This is my Lord. This is the greatest." Then the sun sets, and he turns away from all of these celestial bodies and declares his exclusive belief in the unseen creator of the universe.
The critic's angle here is obvious and highly potent.
A critic looks at this transcript and says, hold on. Abraham just called a star, a moon, and a sun his Lord. He literally committed the unforgivable sin of polytheism 3 separate times in a single night.
Yeah, that's what it looks like.
How can he be upheld as the flawless chosen prophet of monotheism if the text literally documents him worshiping the solar system?
It is a powerful objection because it uses the text's own absolute rules against its main characters. To resolve this, Dr. Amara relies heavily on the linguistic and psychological analysis of classical Islamic commentators.
Who specifically?
Specifically, Al-Qurtubi from the 13th century and al-Zamakhshari from the 12th century. They flip the surface reading entirely. Their argument is that Abraham was never a polytheist, not even for a fraction of a second during this night.
Wait, never. But he said the words.
He did, but we are not reading the private diary of a man stumbling through a crisis of faith. We are reading the public transcript of a highly sophisticated, calculated Socratic debate.
Oh. So we have to look at the historical context of who he's talking to. He is not talking to himself.
No, al-Zamakhshari emphasizes the cultural setting. Abraham was living in ancient Mesopotamia among a community that actively worshipped idols and, crucially, celestial bodies.
Okay, so the stars and planets were their gods.
Yes, the stars, the moon, and the sun were the literal gods of his society. They dictated the seasons, the harvests, and the cultural power structures. Abraham wanted to prove to his people that their entire religious system was logically flawed.
Right.
But consider the social dynamics here. If a young man walks into the center of a deeply religious, astral-worshipping society and simply shouts, "Your gods are fake and you are all wrong," what is the psychological response of the crowd?
Oh, they would instantly put up their defenses. I mean, they would probably attack him, exile him, or just completely ignore him. No one has ever had their mind changed by someone shouting at them that they're foolish.
Exactly. Defensiveness is the enemy of persuasion. So Abraham employs a brilliant, empathetic rhetorical strategy. He joins them. He looks up at the star they revere and he says, "This is my Lord." He adopts their premise. But then he waits for the natural, immutable laws of physics to do the arguing for him.
Ah, because the star has to set.
Right. The Earth rotates, the star sets, it disappears from view, it becomes subject to change, to movement, to absence. And Abraham turns to his people and says, wait, a supreme being cannot be subject to change or absence. It cannot be governed by a system larger than itself. I cannot worship something that fades.
He dismantles the first god using observable reality.
And then he repeats the exact same process with the moon, and then finally with the sun, slowly walking his audience through a logical progression of escalating complexity.
You know, we have a term for this in modern debate culture. It is called steel manning.
Steel manning, yes.
Because straw manning is when you construct a weak, easily defeated version of your opponent's argument just to knock it down and look smart. Steel manning is the exact opposite.
Keep them up.
You take your opponent's argument, you build it up to be as strong as possible, you even adopt it as your own for a moment, and then you walk it to its logical, inevitable conclusion to show everyone exactly why it collapses under its own structural weight. Abraham is steel manning the sun worshippers.
Taking that debate analogy further, look at how he handles the sun. He takes their absolute strongest claim, the sun, the most powerful, life-giving object in their known universe, and he elevates it. He says, this is the greatest.
Right, he builds it up.
But by making it the greatest, its eventual setting becomes the ultimate, undeniable proof of its subservience to a higher mechanical law. And al-Zamakhshari notes a critical grammatical nuance in the Arabic here.
What's the nuance?
By saying, this is my Lord, Abraham is speaking from the perspective of an investigator evaluating a claim. It is an investigative, this is my Lord, with an implied interrogative tone.
Ah, so it's a question.
He is walking the intellectual journey alongside them, guiding their logic so they arrive at the realization themselves rather than having it forced upon them.
It is a brilliant pedagogical method, but honestly, it seems incredibly risky for a spiritual leader. He is pretending to commit the ultimate sin. What if someone in the crowd had a short attention span, walked away before the sun actually set, and just told everyone, hey, good news, Abraham finally converted to sun worship?
It does require immense intellectual confidence and a deep understanding of human psychology. But the commentators argue that the efficacy of this method far outweighs the risk of being misunderstood by a few stragglers.
I suppose that's true.
As we discussed with Tadafu Fikri, direct confrontation breeds a sterile echo chamber. Shared discovery breeds deep internal conviction. Furthermore, there is another deeply philosophical layer to this event, proposed by the famous early scholar Ibn Abbas.
Okay, what did Ibn Abbas say?
He suggested that while Abraham was indeed debating his people, This was also a profound internal exercise for Abraham himself.
So it wasn't purely a performance for the crowd.
No, Ibn Abbas argues that Abraham already knew God intuitively. He possessed what classical scholars call the faith of the fitra, or the pure, innate human nature. But this exercise of observing the cosmos, adopting a premise, and articulating the logic moved his internal faith to a higher epistemological state.
Interesting.
The Quran actually prefaces this entire story by stating that God showed Abraham the kingdom of the heavens and the earth so that he would be among those who have certainty.
Those who have certainty. That phrasing implies there are different levels of knowing something.
Yes, in classical Islamic philosophy, there's a profound difference between ilm al-yaqin, the knowledge of certainty, which is knowing something is true abstractly, and eye al-yaqin, the eye of certainty, which is witnessing the proof.
Oh, I love that distinction.
Ibn Abbas implies that knowing something in your gut is different from being able to deconstruct the universe and prove it with demonstrative logic. By engaging in this cosmic debate, Abraham elevated his faith from a passive intuition into an active, unshakable, logically deduced proof. He proved the necessity of a hidden creator by proving the inadequacy of the visible creation.
That is just incredible. And I really want you, the listener, to pause and reflect on this in the context of your own life. Think about how you try to persuade people at work or in your family or in the terrifying arena of social media.
Yeah, social media is the worst for this.
It really is. Our default mode is often just to hurl facts and statistics at people, telling them how wrong they are and how right we are. And we all know how entirely ineffective that is.
Right. Nobody listens to that.
Do we possess the patience to use Abraham's method? Do we have the empathy to adopt someone else's premise, stand shoulder to shoulder with them and say, okay, let's follow your logic together and see where this path leads? Abraham's debate with the cosmos is not just theology. It is a masterclass in empathy-driven persuasion.
It truly is. He used logic to navigate a deeply complex social and philosophical situation. But our third and final puzzle for this deep dive deals with a scenario where logic, specifically categorical logic, seems to break down entirely.
Okay, brace yourselves.
It requires us to look very closely, not just at timelines or rhetoric, but at the boundaries of language itself.
Right. This brings us to the angelic paradox. Let me lay out the parameters of this final puzzle. The text emphatically states, as a non-negotiable theological rule, that angels do not disobey God.
They are perfect in obedience.
Exactly. They are described as beings of pure obedience who execute commands flawlessly. They simply do not possess the capacity or the mechanism for rebellion. However, early on in the narrative timeline of creation, right after Adam is formed, God issues a direct command to the angels to bow to this new human prototype.
Right.
The text reads, and the angels prostrated, all of them entirely, except Iblis. Iblis, who later becomes known as Satan, refuses the command. He acts out of pure arrogance. Now, the grammatical structure of the sentence lumps him in with the angels.
And the linguistic phrasing is the exact trap the critic points out.
Exactly. The critic asks a devastatingly simple question. If Rule A states that angels cannot disobey, and narrative B states that Iblis disobeyed, the text is structurally contradicting itself.
It's a classic paradox.
The conclusion must be that Iblis is a flawed angel. And if he was a flawed angel, did the Creator make a mistake in his design?
Right. This is a classic categorical paradox. If you have a rule that all A are B and X is grouped within A, but X demonstrates that it is not B, the entire logical system crashes.
The math doesn't work.
To resolve this crash, Dr. Amar brings in the analysis of Imam Muhammad Abduh, a major late 19th and early 20th century scholar, alongside classical linguists. The solution requires a deep dive into semantic categorization and how ancient Arabic handled linguistic subgroups.
Because if the text says the angels prostrated except Iblis, then clearly the word angel must be operating on a broader semantic level than our modern rigid definition.
The general rule regarding angels stands absolute in the theology. Angels, by their fundamental constitution, are inherently obedient, they are made of light, and they lack free will.
Okay, so what about Iblis then?
Well, other sections of the Quran explicitly state that Iblis was not an angel by nature. He was from a completely different category of beings called the jinn.
The jinn. Okay, how do the jinn differ from angels biologically or, constitutionally within the lore of the text?
The text states that while angels are created from light, jinn are created from smokeless fire. But the most critical distinction is not their base material, it is their cognitive capacity.
Free will?
Yes. Jinn possess free will. They have the agency to choose obedience or rebellion, much like humans. So the analytical question we must ask is not, why did an angel miraculously develop the ability to disobey?
Because he was never an angel to begin with.
Right. The real question is, why did the text use the specific word angels to issue a command that apparently included a jinn?
Right. If Iblis is fundamentally a jinn, why didn't the command just say angels and jinn bow down? Why group him into the exception of a rule he doesn't even belong to?
This is where the linguistic archaeology becomes fascinating. Al-Qurtubi and other classical linguists explore the root of the word jinn in Arabic. The root letters are J-N-N.
J-N-N.
Yes. This root conceptually means to be hidden, concealed, or unseen from the human eye. For example, the Arabic word for a lush garden is janna because the thick, dense foliage hides the soil beneath it. The word for a fetus is jeen because it is hidden away within the womb.
Oh, that is beautiful etymology. The language describes the physical reality of the object.
And because both angels and jinn are entities that operate entirely in the unseen realm hidden from human perception, the terms were sometimes historically fluid and intertwined in overarching linguistic categories.
Oh, so they were lumped together colloquially.
Yes. Some ancient linguists even suggested that before the strict theological definitions hardened, jinn might have been considered a specific, fiery subtribe of the broader unseen world, which was generally referred to as angels in common parlance.
Okay, that makes sense.
Muhammad Abdu points out that humans do not possess a definitive Linnaean taxonomy of the unseen world. What the narrative does establish is that Iblis was operating within the ranks of the angels. He lived among them, and according to some traditions, he even taught or led them in worship due to his intense devotion prior to this event.
You know, I have a modern analogy for this that I think perfectly clarifies this linguistic grouping and the resulting paradox.
Oh, I'd love to hear it.
Imagine you work at a massive multinational corporation. The CEO sends out a mandatory company-wide email to a distribution list titled All Employees. The email says, all employees must attend the mandatory training seminar on Friday.
Okay, pretty standard.
Now, everyone on that list must comply. It is explicitly written into their W-2 employment contracts, but there is one guy on the email list who is actually an independent 1099 contractor.
Ah, I see where this is going.
He receives the email because he works in the exact same building, he uses the same break room, and his email address was added to the all employees distribution list purely for administrative convenience. But his underlying contract, his legal nature, is fundamentally different.
Right, he's not an employee.
Exactly. When Friday comes, the contractor looks at the email and says, no, I am not going. The CEO did not make a mistake by using the all employees list, and the contractor did not break the laws of physics by refusing.
No, of course not.
The command applied to the general group he was embedded in, but his specific constitutional nature allowed him the capacity to choose disobedience, whereas the actual W-2 employees could not.
That is a phenomenal way to explain it. And taking that corporate analogy further, the refusal of the contractor actually highlights the binding nature of the W-2 employees' contracts.
Because everyone else went.
Exactly. The overarching divine command to prostrate was directed at the assembly of unseen beings present in that moment, referred to collectively by the dominant group, the angels. Iblis was physically and administratively included in that assembly, which explains the grammatical structure. The angels prostrated except Iblis.
Right.
But his underlying contract, his constitutional nature as a jinn, created from fire and endowed with free will, gave him the tragic capacity to say no.
But this distinction between an angel and a jinn in this moment isn't just trivia for the theology exam, is it? Resolving this paradox seems to carry massive philosophical weight for the entire worldview of the text.
Oh, the philosophical implications are immense. Dr. Amara and the classical scholars emphasize why resolving this specific grammatical puzzle is so vital. By understanding the linguistic overlap and the constitutional difference, the text achieves two crucial theological goals simultaneously.
What's the first one?
First, it completely preserves the absolute purity and flawlessness of the angelic beings. They remain a perfect, unbroken execution of divine will. There is no defect in the manufacturing of the angels.
Okay, and the second.
Second, and perhaps more importantly for the human beings reading the text, it establishes the precise origin of evil and disobedience in the universe.
Because if Iblis was a flawed angel, then God is the author of evil by intentionally creating a defective being who couldn't help but disobey.
Exactly. If he was a broken angel, his disobedience was predetermined by a manufacturing defect. He would have been a victim of his own coding. But because he is a jinn endowed with free will, His disobedience stems entirely from his own conscious choice.
It's his own fault.
Yes. When he is interrogated in the text about why he refused the command, he doesn't say, "I couldn't help it, my programming failed." He says, "I am better than him. You created me from fire and him from clay."
Pure arrogance.
It is pure, calculated, ego-driven arrogance. The categorical paradox resolves into a profound, terrifying lesson on the danger of free will when it is coupled with an unchecked ego. It is the burden of choice.
Wow. We have journeyed through 3 incredibly dense, head-scratching puzzles today. Let's sort of pull back and synthesize what we've learned from this first third of Dr. Amara's work.
It's been a journey.
We looked at the biological timeline of creation, the astronomical debate of Abraham, and the linguistic paradox of the disobedient angel.
And if we look at the core takeaways uniting these 3 case studies, they all point to the absolute necessity of a multidimensional reading of complex texts. What appears on the surface as a flat, undeniable contradiction almost always requires us to look deeper and apply the correct diagnostic tool.
Right. Like in the first case, the timeline of human creation, the tool was chronological mapping.
Yes. We had to recognize that we couldn't confuse the blueprint of the prototype with the manufacturing process of the descendants.
We had to separate the sounding clay from the embryological clot.
Exactly. And in the second case, Abraham and the Stars, the tool was understanding rhetorical devices and the historical context of persuasion. We had to realize that taking a quote out of context, reading a Socratic debate as a diary entry, can completely invert the meaning of a historical event.
We had to recognize the ultimate steel-manning exercise.
And in the third case, the angelic paradox, the tool was delving into overlapping semantic categories. We had to understand how ancient language grouped the unseen world and how the exception of Iblis actually proved the rule of free will rather than breaking the rule of angelic obedience.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I really want you, the listener, to think about how this methodology applies far beyond the realm of ancient theology.
It applies to everything, really.
It really does. What Dr. Amara is doing in this book is delivering a masterclass in high-level reading comprehension. It trains us not to panic and not to be instantly dismissive when we see a contradiction in any text, in any argument, or even in a modern news article.
It forces us to slow down.
Exactly. It teaches us to pause the outrage and ask the diagnostic questions like, am I missing the timeline here? Am I missing the rhetorical context? Am I misunderstanding the categories the author is utilizing?
It is about making the active choice to move from being a passive consumer of information to an active investigator. The friction of the text, the tadafu fikri we spoke about at the very beginning, is not a barrier. It is an invitation to understand the architecture of the idea more profoundly.
Absolutely. And I want to leave you with a lingering, provocative thought to mull over today as you go about your life. Think about a deeply held belief or a fact you recently encountered in an article or a video that seemed to completely contradict something else you knew to be true.
We encounter that daily.
We do. And usually our modern instinct is to immediately reject one or the other, to break out that diagnostic X-ray machine and demand a clean, binary answer. But what if you assumed both pieces of information were true, just operating in different contexts at different points on a timeline or within different linguistic categories?
It changes everything.
How would adopting that multidimensional lens change the way you interact with the overwhelming flood of information tomorrow? Maybe, just maybe, the muddy waters aren't a sign that the system is broken. Maybe they are an invitation to finally dive deeper.
Imagine finding an ancient manuscript. Right. And it claims the universe took exactly 8 days to build.
Okay.
But then you flip to the very next page and it insists the total is 6.
Right, which sounds like a pretty massive error.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So do you just throw the text out as a mathematical failure? Or, as Dr. Muhammad Amara suggests, are you just too deeply wired into the 21st century to understand the math of the 7th century?
It's a great question, and it really forces a rather uncomfortable mirror onto the reader.
Yeah.
Because we just assume our modern framework, how we count, how we record history, how we perceive time, we assume that is the absolute baseline for reality.
Right, the ultimate standard.
Exactly. So when an ancient text breaks our modern rules, we immediately cry foul. We declare a contradiction.
We assume the text failed the test rather than considering maybe we're grading it with the wrong rubric entirely.
Exactly.
Well, welcome to this deep dive. Today, our mission is to unpack a really specific, highly analytical middle section of Dr. Muhammad Amar's work, Doubts About the Quran.
Yeah, it's a fascinating section.
It really is. We are looking at what happens when a modern mind applies its rigid, post-Enlightenment framework to a classical text. Amara takes on critics who comb through the source material looking for paradoxes.
And he pushes back hard.
Very hard. And his defense isn't just a theological shield. It is a rigorous mechanical dismantling of the criticisms using linguistics, philosophy, and even physics.
I think we should state clearly at the outset, though, for everyone listening, our analysis today is entirely focused on those mechanics.
Yes, absolutely.
We are not here to endorse a theology or take a stance on divine revelation or try to convince you of any religious truth.
Right, we're totally impartial here.
Our role is strictly to examine how Dr. Amara structures his intellectual defense. We are looking at the underlying logic he uses to resolve these perceived contradictions.
We're basically dissecting the engine of his debate.
Perfect way to put it.
And we're going to start massive today. I mean, looking at the physics of the universe and the concept of time itself.
Then we'll zoom in a bit,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, we'll zoom in on historical names, and finally we'll dissect the exact words shouted by an ancient crowd. It's a wild ride.
It really is. Where does Amara start this middle section?
So he starts by tackling a philosophical paradox that is literally as massive as the universe itself.
Okay, let's hear it.
The source text states that all creatures in the heavens and the earth are devoutly obedient to God. The Arabic term used is qanatun. Everything follows the rules.
Right.
But, I mean, any casual observer of human history can see that we are a spectacularly disobedient species.
To put it mildly.
Right. And the text itself dedicates entire chapters to the rebellion of Pharaoh, the people of Lot, and just countless other civilizations.
Which creates an immediate surface-level paradox.
Exactly.
You can't simultaneously claim that the universe is a theater of absolute unbending obedience while highlighting the sheer volume of human rebellion occurring on its stage.
It just doesn't compute.
Critics point to this and say, well, it's a glaring logical flaw. It's the classic tension between determinism and free will, just magnified to a cosmic scale.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. If the universe is a tightly run ship where everything follows the captain's orders, how do we explain the mutineers?
Right.
It feels like, well, it's like gravity versus a speed limit.
Oh, I like that. Gravity versus a speed limit.
Yeah. So the physical universe is bound by gravity. You have no choice but to obey it. You can't just wake up one morning and decide to float.
Sadly, no.
But human morality is a speed limit. The sign says 55. You are commanded to do 55. But the engine of your car absolutely allows you to do 90.
Exactly.
The existence of a speeding car doesn't mean the law doesn't exist, you know? It just means the law requires your active consent to function.
That distinction right there between gravity and the speed limit, that is essentially the core of Dr. Amara's resolution.
Oh, really?
Yeah, though he frames it through the lens of classical Islamic theology. He argues that the contradiction disappears the moment you realize the text is operating with two entirely different categories of divine decree.
Okay, two categories. What's the first one?
The first is the formative or inevitable decree, which is known as tawfiqi or takwini.
Okay, so this would be the gravity in our scenario.
Correct. The takwini decree applies to entities devoid of free will.
So like rocks and planets.
Rocks, planets, the stars, the planetary orbits, tectonic plates, the behavior of subatomic particles. The text specifically references the creation of the heavens and the earth, commanding them to come together willingly or unwillingly.
And what's their response?
Their response is, we come willingly. They are structurally incapable of mutiny. The obedience of the physical cosmos is absolute and deterministic.
Wow. Okay, so wait. That means Pharaoh's biological heart was fully compliant with the physics of the universe, right?
Yes, exactly.
It was pumping blood via the inevitable decree, even while his conscious mind was in full mutiny.
That is the crucial pivot Dr. Amara makes. The conscious mind operates under the second category,
Which is?
the legislative or choice-based decree known as taklifai or tashri.
The speed limit.
The speed limit. This decree applies to humans, and within the theological framework, the jinn who actually possess agency.
Right.
Under the Tashri decree, God provides the moral speed limit. The text cites commands like honoring one's parents, seen in Surah Al-Isra. God wants humans to obey, but the physical enforcement of that obedience is intentionally suspended.
I mean, I would argue that suspension of enforcement is literally the only thing that gives the concept of obedience any actual value.
How so?
Well, if you force an AI to say, I love you, it means nothing.
Sure.
But if a human chooses to say it, despite having the freedom to say something awful, it holds weight.
Dr. Amara leans heavily into that requirement for justice. Without the freedom to violate the legislative decree, the whole concept of morality, accountability, and reward just disintegrates.
It falls apart completely.
Right. The rebellion of figures like Pharaoh doesn't negate the universal obedience of the formative decree. It merely demonstrates the intended boundaries of the legislative decree.
So the paradox is resolved by separating the physical architecture of the universe from the moral architecture of human consciousness.
Exactly. It's a very elegant theological defense.
It is. But if Dr. Amara successfully establishes that the physical universe operates on this strict, inevitable set of laws, he immediately runs into a new trap.
And what's that?
The timeline of those laws.
Ah, yes. The creation timeline.
Right. From the nature of creation, we naturally move to the timeline of creation. And this brings us to the second major critique he addresses in this section.
The 6 days.
The 6 days. The Quran states the heavens and the earth were created in 6 days. Yet modern astrophysics and geology definitively tell us the universe is billions of years old.
A rough estimate is 13.8 billion years.
Exactly. 6 days versus 13.8 billion years.
Yeah.
This isn't just a minor discrepancy.
No.
To a modern reader, it looks like a catastrophic failure of ancient cosmology.
And, well, if you apply a strict 21st century literalist reading to the English translation of the text, it is a failure. But Dr. Amara argues that the failure actually belongs to the modern reader.
How so?
Because we're imposing an Earth-centric measurement onto a cosmic event. He attacks the foundational assumption of the critique itself.
Which is the definition of the word day.
Yes, because we assume a day is 24 hours.
Because the Earth rotates on its axis and the sun appears to rise and set.
Exactly. But functionally, think about it.
Yeah.
How could you have an Earth day before the Earth was even formed?
Yeah, you literally can't. The sun and the Earth didn't exist yet.
Right. So measuring the creation of the universe in 24-hour earthly increments makes no logical sense. It's completely anachronistic.
So what does Dr. Amara suggest it actually means?
He points out that the Arabic word yom, which gets translated as day, historically and linguistically functions as a term for an era.
Okay, an era.
An era, a stage, or just a distinct period of time, regardless of its actual duration.
That makes a lot more sense.
And he proves this not by looking outward at modern science first, but by looking inward at the text's own internal logic regarding time.
This is where the source material genuinely surprised me, because it shows the text treating time as highly elastic.
It stretches and compresses subjective time constantly.
Yeah. What are some of the examples he pulls from the text?
They are really striking. He cites the narrative of a man who was rendered dead for 100 years.
Okay, a full century.
Right. Upon his revival, he is asked how long he believes he has been in that state, and his answer is a day or part of a day.
Wow. So his subjective psychological experience of a century was compressed into just a few hours.
Exactly. And then you have the sleepers of the cave.
Oh, I've heard of this one.
They remain dormant for over 3 centuries, over 300 years.
And when they wake up?
Upon waking, they have the exact same temporal disorientation. They assume they've only slept for a day or part of a day.
It's the exact same phrase.
Dr. Amara uses these narratives to demonstrate that the text actively decouples the perception of time from the objective passing of astronomical time.
He also brings up the psychological distortion of time at the resurrection, right?
Yes, that's a huge one.
The text describes individuals looking back at their entire earthly lifetimes, decades of lived experience, and feeling as though they had only existed on Earth for a single morning or evening.
Or even just one day.
Right. The sheer weight of their new reality retroactively shrinks their perception of the past. So the text clearly understands that time is subjective to the observer.
But he goes even further than that. He establishes that time is also objectively relative on a cosmic scale.
What do you mean by that?
Well, Dr. Amara highlights verses that explicitly state a day with the Creator is like 1,000 years of what you count.
Like 1,000 years.
And another verse detailing angels ascending in a day, the measure of which is 50,000 years.
The word like in that verse, like 1,000 years, seems totally critical here.
How so?
It signals a metaphor for unimaginable vastness, not a literal one-to-one conversion rate. It isn't saying one divine day is exactly 365,000 earthly days.
No, not at all.
It's saying your localized experience of time is completely irrelevant to the cosmic scale.
Exactly. And Dr. Amara actually bridges this ancient linguistic framework with modern theoretical physics.
Here is where it gets really interesting for me.
He references the speed of light, the speed of sound, and the concept of light years to validate the text.
I loved this part, because Einstein's theory of relativity proved that time isn't a fixed, universal ticking clock.
It bends.
It bends and dilates depending on your speed and your gravitational context. Like, if you were traveling near the speed of light, time basically stops for you while millennia pass for a stationary observer back on Earth.
Exactly.
We literally measure the vastness of the universe in light years. We're using time to measure distance.
By bringing relativity into the discussion, Dr. Amara completely reframes the ancient text. When the Quran states that the universe was created in 6 days, it is describing 6 vast evolutionary epochs or stages of development.
6 stages.
It is describing cosmic time, not localized planetary rotation. The text's assertion that human time is entirely different from cosmic time isn't some archaic error. It's actually a concept that physics would take another 1,000 years to empirically prove.
That is just wild to think about. But, okay, let's play devil's advocate here.
Sure.
If we accept that these days are actually massive cosmic epochs, Dr. Amara still has to defend the text from a mathematical trap of its own making.
Ah, the math riddle.
Yeah, having established that a day is a relative epoch, we have to figure out how many of these days there actually were. Because if the universe was created in 6 distinct stages, why does a specific sequence in Surah Fussilat seemingly add up to 8?
This is probably one of the most famous textual riddles critics use to attack the text's internal consistency.
I can see why.
Verses 9 through 12 of Surah Fussilat break down the creation timeline in detail. It states the earth was created in 2 days.
Okay, 2 days for the earth.
Then it details the formation of mountains and the distribution of sustenance in 4 days.
So we have 2 and then 4.
Finally, it describes the formation of the heavens in 2 days.
Okay, I'm going to play the absolute skeptic here because the math is aggressively straightforward.
There's math.
2 epochs for the earth, 4 epochs for the mountains and sustenance, 2 epochs for the heavens, 2 plus 4 plus 2 equals 8.
Right.
Yet everywhere else, the text insists the total is 6. If it means 6, why wouldn't it just say 6?
It looks bad.
It looks really bad. Using a confusing counting method feels like a desperate post hoc rationalization by commentators trying to fix a glaring addition error. Did the text just fail basic math?
That is exactly how a modern reader approaches it. We view it as an accountant's ledger that just fails to balance.
Exactly.
But Dr. Amara doesn't invent some new modern defense to fix this. He actually relies on the foundational rules of classical Arabic rhetoric.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he brings in classical commentators, giants like Al-Qurtubi and Al-Zamakhshari, to explain a linguistic structure known as inclusive counting.
Okay, inclusive counting. How does inclusive counting force 2 plus 4 plus 2 to equal 6?
It requires understanding that the phrase "in 4 days" does not mean an additional 4 days appended to the first 2.
Wait, what does it mean then?
It means the completion of 4 days total from the initiation of the process.
Oh, I see.
Al-Qurtubi provided an analogy that is just vital to understanding the ancient mindset here. He said, it is akin to someone telling you, I traveled from Basra to Baghdad in 10 days and to Kufa in 15 days.
Okay, let me think about that. If I hear that today, my brain immediately uses additive counting.
Right. You add them up.
Yeah. 10 days for the first leg to Baghdad and 15 days for the second leg to Kufa. The whole trip took 25 days.
But a native speaker of classical Arabic in an oral culture would process that entirely differently.
How so?
They would understand that by the time the traveler reached Kufa, 15 days had elapsed in total since leaving Basra.
Oh.
The first leg took 10 days, meaning the second leg only took 5. The 15 encompasses the 10.
The entire trip took 15 days, with the second leg taking 5. But why use that structure, though? I mean, why not just say the trip took 15 days, 10 for the first part, 5 for the second? Why introduce a structure that seems, to a modern mind at least, designed to confuse a ledger?
Because classical Arabic, particularly in its poetic and oral traditions, prioritized the rhythm of the narrative.
The rhythm.
Yes, and the emphasis on the totality of an event over strict mathematical compartmentalization. By stating in 4 days for the earth and its sustenance, the text emphasizes that the complete foundational stage of the earthly habitat took 4 epochs.
Okay, let me try to map that back to the actual verses just to make sure I have this right.
Go for it.
So the earth itself is formed in 2 epochs.
Right.
Then the mountains and sustenance are added, bringing the total time spent on the earthly phase to 4 epochs.
Exactly.
Meaning the mountains and sustenance phase actually took 2 epochs.
Yes.
So we are at 4 epochs total for the earth stuff. Then the heavens are formed in 2 epochs.
And 4 plus 2.
4 plus 2 equals 6. Wow.
The math is flawless.
It actually is flawless.
If you understand the syntax of the language in which it was written.
That is a massive aha moment for me.
Dr. Amara uses this to highlight a broader danger, really. Literal word-for-word translation across dramatically different linguistic cultures often strips away structural idioms.
You end up with completely manufactured controversies.
Simply because the modern reader is ignorant of colloquial grammar from centuries ago.
It's a powerful warning about the decay of meaning through translation, which actually transitions us perfectly from linguistic structure to historical transmission.
Now we move to the human timeline.
Yes, because the next major critique Dr. Amara addresses relies entirely on the assumption that ancient names remain static across thousands of years of translation.
We are moving into the realm of biblical versus Quranic history.
Right, and critics frequently use the Bible as an infallible historical baseline to challenge the Quran.
The premise is pretty straightforward for them. The Bible is older, it records the names of historical figures, and the Quran, arriving centuries later, often provides different names for those exact same figures.
Therefore, the younger text must be historically inaccurate. It got the names wrong.
That's the claim.
Dr. Amara examines 2 specific test cases here. Case A is the father of Abraham. The biblical text names him Terah,
Right.
but the Quran names him Azar.
Okay.
And case B is the Egyptian master who purchases Joseph. The Bible calls him Potiphar. The Quran calls him Al-Aziz.
On the surface, these look like direct historical contradictions.
Absolutely. So how does Amara handle this?
Well, before he even addresses the specific names, Dr. Amara challenges the foundational premise itself. He disputes the idea that biblical texts can serve as a flawless baseline for historical nomenclature in the first place.
Interesting. Why?
He argues that biblical manuscripts underwent massive cycles of translation, transliteration, and localized adaptation over millennia.
From Hebrew to Greek, Greek to Latin, Latin to English.
It's an ancient game of telephone. Names are incredibly volatile in manuscript transmission.
We see this all the time, actually. The Hebrew name Yeshua becomes the Greek Jesus, which becomes the Latin Iosus, which becomes the English Jesus.
Exactly. So, assuming the older document retains the phonetically accurate historical name, despite its muddy transmission chain, is a flawed methodology to begin with.
He's basically saying you can't use a highly translated text to correct another text.
Right. Dr. Amara posits the Quran as a preserved primary text that acts as a corrective filter, rather than a derivative text that made a mistake.
Okay, so that's the baseline defense. But what about the specific names? Terah versus Izar.
He dives deep into the historical theories surrounding them, demonstrating that they might not even be contradictory at all.
Let's get granular here. How do classical scholars explain the Terah versus Izar discrepancy?
There are a few prominent theories. The first, which is supported by commentators like Al-Tabari, suggests that Terah was his given personal name, while Izar was an epithet or an official title.
A title?
Yes. The root of the word Azar is believed to be non-Arabic, carrying the meaning of helper, or one who supports.
And historically, Abraham's father wasn't just a random citizen, right? He was deeply embedded in the power structure.
He was a high-ranking official, essentially a minister to the king, Nimrod.
So calling him Azar the helper would be akin to identifying him by his prominent political role.
Exactly. But there is a second, even more fascinating theory, and this one is based purely on classical Arabic syntax.
Oh, I love the syntax ones. Hit me.
Some linguists propose that Azar wasn't a person at all.
Wait, what?
They argue Azar was actually the name of the specific idol that Abraham's father worshipped.
Wait, how does that work with the text? The verse says, when Abraham said to his father Azar, do you take idols as gods?
It all hinges on grammatical case endings.
Okay, explain that for me.
In classical Arabic, the position and vocalization of a word dictate its function in the sentence. Based on certain readings of the grammatical case, Azar can be interpreted as an omission structure. The full implication of the syntax would actually be, when Abraham said to his father, do you take the idol Azar as a god?
Whoa, so the name of the father is entirely absent from the verse.
Yes.
And the text is specifying the deity being debated instead.
Precisely. That completely disintegrates the contradiction. Terah is the father. Azar is the idol.
That is wild. Okay, what about the second case? Potiphar versus Al-Aziz in the story of Joseph.
This case is much more direct. It serves as a prime example of distinguishing between personal names and official titles.
Another title.
Yes, in ancient Egyptian administration and carried over into classical Arabic, Al-Aziz was not a personal name. It was a functional title translating roughly to the mighty, or, in a bureaucratic context, the chief minister or head of police.
Me is his job description.
Precisely. And if you look at the biblical text, Potiphar is his given name. But the Bible also provides his job title. He is referred to in Hebrew as the Sar Hadabahim.
And what does that mean?
It translates to the captain of the guard or the chief executioner.
Okay, so let me get this straight. The Bible says his name was Potiphar, and his job was the head of the guard.
Right.
The Quran simply refers to him as the head of the guard, Al-Aziz.
Exactly.
There is zero contradiction there.
Not at all.
It's like finding a document from today that says Joe Biden signed the legislation and another document that says the president signed the legislation.
That's a perfect analogy.
If a historian in the year 4000 argues that one document is a forgery because Biden and president don't match, they are uncovering a lie.
No, the historian is demonstrating a fundamental ignorance of how titles function.
It's just a different mode of identification.
Ancient Egyptian records frequently prioritized titles over personal names anyway, because the office itself was viewed as eternal and culturally significant, whereas the individual holding it was just temporary.
That makes total sense.
Dr. Amara shows that critics often flatten ancient texts. They demand these ancient records conform to modern journalistic standards of name-dropping, rather than understanding the cultural priorities of the era.
And that flattening of the text becomes even more apparent in the final and perhaps most complex contradiction Dr. Amara addresses.
The big one.
Yeah. We've looked at the universe, we looked at the math, and we've looked at the names. Now we are zooming all the way in on a highly specific piece of dialogue shouted by an angry crowd thousands of years ago.
We are talking about the Sister of Aaron anachronism.
This one is fascinating because at first glance, it really does appear to be an indefensible historical blunder.
It's a favorite among critics.
Let's set the stage for the listener. The narrative is found in Surah Maryam. Mary, the mother of Jesus, returns to her community carrying the infant Jesus.
Right.
The crowd, obviously assuming she has committed a grave sin, furiously confronts her. They hurl accusations, and the text records them shouting, "Oh, sister of Aaron, your father was not a man of evil, nor was your mother unchaste."
And the chronological problem here is massive.
Huge. Aaron was the brother of Moses. Miriam was their sister. They existed during the period of the Exodus.
Right.
But Mary, the mother of Jesus, lived in first century Judea. We are looking at a historical gap of well over 1,000 years.
It's a massive leap.
So critics point to this and say, the author of the Quran simply confused Mary with Miriam because their names are similar in Arabic and Hebrew and completely collapsed a millennium of history.
It is a very compelling critique.
Yeah.
If you assume the text is operating as an omniscient historical narrator directly stating a genealogical fact.
But it isn't.
No. Dr. Amara's defense rests on basic reading comprehension regarding literary devices. The Quran is not stating she was his biological sister.
What is it doing?
The Quran is employing a dialogue tag. It is explicitly quoting the mob.
The text is acting as a journalist recording what was shouted in the heat of the moment.
Exactly, and that reframes the entire problem.
Right. The question is no longer, why did the Quran make a historical error?
The question becomes, why did a first-century Judean crowd choose to insult Mary by calling her the sister of Aaron?
Which requires an understanding of the sociology of ancient Middle Eastern honor and shame cultures.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Dr. Amara pulls from classical commentary to offer 3 distinct explanations for the crowd's choice of words, focusing on how idioms and social markers functioned in that specific society.
Okay, let's break those down. Why Aaron?
The first, and honestly most sociologically rich explanation, is sarcasm, rooted in lineage.
Sarcasm?
Yes. Aaron was the foundational figure of the Israelite priesthood. His name was synonymous with ultimate piety and religious devotion.
Okay.
Now, before this event, Mary herself was known throughout the community as a deeply pious woman, totally dedicated to temple service.
She was perceived as the absolute pinnacle of virtue.
Right, so when she suddenly appears with a child out of wedlock, the crowd's reaction isn't just anger, it's a profound sense of betrayal by someone they viewed as holy.
Oh, I see where this is going.
By calling her sister of Aaron, they're invoking the highest standard of purity to mock her current state. It is a biting, sarcastic idiom. Oh, look at our holy sister of Aaron now. Look how far the pious have fallen.
It leverages her past reputation as a weapon against her.
Exactly.
I mean, we do this today. If someone known for being a genius makes a profoundly stupid mistake, You might sarcastically call them Einstein.
Right. Good job, Einstein.
You don't literally believe they're a 20th century German physicist. You are using the historical icon to highlight the absurdity of the moment.
Exactly. The second explanation is more literal, but equally grounded in the culture of the time.
What's the second one?
The name Aaron in Hebrew, Harun in Arabic, was an exceptionally common given name among the Israelites, precisely to honor the original high priest.
Like people naming their kids Muhammad or John today.
Exactly. So it is entirely plausible that Mary had a biological brother or a close contemporary in her tribe, actually named Aaron, who was well known for his virtue.
Okay, so the crowd would simply be addressing her by her immediate familial relation.
Right, to emphasize the shame she was bringing to her contemporary family.
It's the ancient equivalent of saying, how could you do this to your brother?
Exactly.
But there is a third explanation, right? And this one flips the dynamic entirely.
Yes. The third classical explanation posits that there was a notoriously wicked, highly visible individual named Aaron living in that region during her time.
A local villain.
Right. In ancient tight-knit communities, individuals often became local archetypes for certain behaviors. By branding her the sister of Aaron, they were verbally stripping her of her pious reputation and affiliating her with the local symbol of degeneracy.
They were associating her with the outcast.
Yes.
It all comes back to how language is used in real life versus how it's analyzed centuries later. Like, if a historian 3,000 years from now finds a digital archive where someone is called a Benedict Arnold, and the historian assumes the writer literally believed the person was an 18th century American general,
then the failure of logic belongs to the historian.
Exactly. Context, idiom, and the emotional intent of dialogue are critical. Dr. Amara meticulously demonstrates how flattening a text, stripping away its literary devices just to manufacture a contradiction, is intellectually dishonest.
What Dr. Amara achieves in this specific section of his book is a comprehensive defense of reading ancient texts on their own terms.
It really is.
Whether it's acknowledging the philosophical nuance between inevitable physical laws and legislative moral commands,
Right.
or recognizing the cosmic relativity of time long before modern physics ever defined it.
The light years concept.
Exactly. Or understanding the inclusive counting mechanics of classical oral traditions, or preserving the emotional reality of ancient idioms.
It really is a masterclass in challenging our own modern arrogance. We just assume our current lens is the only lens capable of perceiving truth.
We really do.
But as we've seen today in this deep dive, when you look deeply at the mechanics of the language, the history, and the philosophy, the text isn't blurry at all.
No, it's not.
The underlying logic is highly structured and profoundly consistent.
It leaves us with a vital realization regarding the friction of translation.
Yeah, tell me about that.
When you engage with any ancient document, whether it's religious, historical, or philosophical, you must ask yourself a question.
Which is?
How many of the errors you perceive are actually just lost idioms, misunderstood bureaucratic titles, or concepts of relativity expressed in the hyper-specific contextual language of a bygone era?
That is a fascinating thought to mull over. It forces you to take off your 21st century glasses and try to see the world as the authors and the original audience saw it.
It's the only way to truly understand history.
I want to thank you for joining us on this incredibly dense, deeply fascinating journey through Dr. Amara's analytical framework today. Keep questioning your assumptions, keep examining the mechanics of the arguments you encounter, and always be aware of the lens you are using to read the world.
You know, usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of absolute, uncompromising precision.
Right, yeah. Like engineering.
Exactly. It's like engineering.
Yeah,
You
right.
break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line on the radius bone, and the doctor just points at the illuminated film and says, you know, there it is.
Right, it is binary.
Yeah, it is visible, it's quantifiable, and it is undeniably there.
The fracture is either there or it is not. You don't have to debate the mood of the bone or the historical context of the x-ray machine.
Exactly. And it's comforting. I mean, we as modern people love things to be visible and neatly categorized.
Oh, absolutely.
We want our data to be unambiguous. We want our answers to fit perfectly into a little spreadsheet cell. But then you step out of the realm of the hard physical sciences and into the world of, say, neurodevelopment or psychology or, well, in the case of what we are doing today.
The world of ancient texts.
Yes, ancient texts and historical linguistics, and suddenly that x-ray machine is completely useless.
Yeah, totally useless.
You hold up your spreadsheet to an ancient manuscript, and the data just doesn't fit. We find ourselves looking at a diagnostic landscape that is, honestly, incredibly murky.
It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters, because human communication, especially communication that spans across multiple millennia, is not an X-ray. It is much closer to a painting.
Oh, I like that. Oh, painting.
Yeah, it's layered, it is highly subjective, it relies heavily on cultural context, and it is entirely dependent on the perspective of the observer.
Right.
So when you read a text from the ancient Near East with a 21st century post-Enlightenment hyper-literalist brain, you're almost guaranteed to misread the data.
Which brings us perfectly to our mission for today. For you, our listener, wherever you happen to be tuning in from today, maybe you're prepping for a university theology class, maybe you're brushing up on comparative religion to win an argument at a dinner party.
Always a good reason.
Right. Or maybe you just have this insatiable curiosity about how world-shaping texts are actually dismantled and analyzed by the experts. Because today, we are going deep into the mechanics of reading.
We really are.
We are looking at a brilliant piece of source material. It's a book called Misconceptions About the Quran by Dr. Muhammad Amara.
It's just a remarkable piece of scholarship.
It really is.
Dr. Amara tackles some of the most complex, debated, and seemingly contradictory passages in the text, and he does it with the precision of a master linguist.
Now, I want to establish our ground rules right out of the gate for this deep dive. Yeah. We are focusing specifically on a really fascinating middle slice of Dr. Amara's work.
Right.
We are not here to debate theology. We are not here to take religious sides or endorse a worldview or proselytize. Our approach today is purely analytical.
Exactly. We're looking at the mechanics.
Right. We want to look at this source material as a masterclass in textual analysis, classical linguistics, and logical deduction. We want to see how a scholar takes a text that seems, well, on its surface at least, to be fundamentally contradicting itself or contradicting modern science or clashing with established historical records.
And applies a rigorous methodology to decode what is actually happening beneath the surface.
Yes.
And that is the perfect framework, because what is truly fascinating here is that the perceived contradictions are not actually dead ends.
Right.
They are gateways to a much deeper, more sophisticated understanding of the text.
Okay, I love that.
Yeah, I mean, when you encounter a paradox in a highly complex ancient document, your first instinct shouldn't immediately be, aha, I caught a typo.
Right, I found the mistake.
Exactly. Your first thought should be, what linguistic, idiom, cultural tone, or historical context am I entirely missing right now? And Dr. Amara's work is essentially a masterclass in how to ask and answer that exact question.
So let's start by looking at one of the oldest philosophical problems in the history of humans which Dr. Amara tackles head-on in this section. The problem of universal obedience versus human rebellion.
Oh, this is a big one.
It's massive. I'm looking at the source text, and Dr. Amara highlights this glaring core contradiction. The text states, very clearly in places like Surah Ar-Rum, that all creatures in the heavens and the earth are, quote, obedient and submissive to God.
Right.
It uses this concept of being completely subservient. So picture total universal harmony.
Correct. The text repeatedly emphasizes the absolute sovereignty of the creator over the creation.
Right.
The implication is total compliance to the divine will. You know, the stars, the planets, the earth, the mountains, they all submit.
Right. But then you literally just turn the page, and the text is absolutely saturated with stories about horrific human disobedience.
Yeah, endless story.
I mean, we have the Pharaoh in Egypt, who is so arrogant he literally declares himself to be a god.
Right.
We have the people of Lot, who completely reject their prophet. We have these endless repeating cycles of prophets arriving with a message, the people rebelling, a catastrophe happening, and then the next generation rebelling all over again.
It's a constant cycle.
So from a purely logical standpoint, the X-ray looks blurry. How can a text claim that the universe is perfectly obedient and submissive to a divine will while simultaneously serving as a theater for endless, catastrophic human rebellion?
It's a great question.
If God's will is absolute, how does a human even have the capacity to say no?
It is a profound philosophical paradox. I mean, if a creator is all-powerful and decrees that everything must obey, then human rebellion should be literally impossible.
Right, it shouldn't compute.
Exactly. And conversely, if a human can rebel, well, then the creator's will isn't really absolute, is it?
Right.
But Dr. Amara resolves this not by just waving his hands and saying, oh, it's a mystery of faith. He dives into the precise Arabic terminology used for the concept of divine decree and will. Specifically, he unpacks a term called qada.
Okay, qada. Let's define that for the listener.
In classical Arabic, qada roughly translates to a decree, a ruling, or a divine will.
Okay.
But the crucial insight that Dr. Amara brings forward here is that in the Quranic framework, qada is not a monolith.
Interesting.
It is actually divided into two entirely distinct categories of decree. The first type is what we can call the formative or deterministic will.
Deterministic will.
Yeah.
Okay.
The Arabic terms Dr. Amara references here point to something being takini or hatmi, which essentially means deterministic, inescapable, and built into the very fabric of creation.
So we were talking about the basic code of the universe, like the laws of physics, thermodynamics, gravity.
Exactly. This type of decree applies to the non-free will universe, the cosmos, the stars, the basic laws of nature, cellular biology.
Right.
When the text talks about the heavens and the earth being formed, it says they are commanded to come willingly or by compulsion, and they respond, we come willingly. But, and this is key, they don't have a conscious choice.
Because they're just physical matter.
Right. They have no agency to disobey physical laws. A rock dropped from a cliff does not pause in midair to deliberate on whether it feels like falling today.
Right.
It submits entirely to the deterministic will of gravity.
It's like the sun doesn't wake up on a Tuesday and say, you know what, I'm tired of this whole east to west routine. I think I'm going to rise in the north today just to mix things up.
Yeah, exactly.
It is entirely subservient to the orbital mechanics decreed for it.
Precisely. And in that specific sense, everything in the heavens and the earth is completely obedient.
Okay.
Even the biological processes in the body of a human being who is actively rebelling against God, those processes are still perfectly submitting to the divine laws of biology.
Oh, wow. We never thought about it like that.
Right. Their heart beats, their lungs process oxygen, their cells divide according to the deterministic decree. So the physical universe is flawlessly obedient.
Yeah.
But then we have the second category of decree.
And I imagine this is where humans come in and complicate all the math.
Oh, absolutely. The second type of decree is the free will or choice will.
Okay.
In Arabic, this relates to the concept of takyiri, which means having the option, the volition, or the choice. And this decree applies strictly and exclusively to beings that possess conscious agency. In the textual framework of the Quran, that means humans and jinn.
So beings with a conscious mind and ego and the actual neurological ability to say, no, I don't want to do that.
Exactly. Under this type of decree, these conscious agents are given behavioral commandments. They are told what the ideal moral behavior is.
Right.
For example, they are decreed to honor their parents, to tell the truth, to act with justice, to care for the vulnerable.
Okay.
But, and this is the absolute crux of the entire issue, they are granted the absolute freedom to choose whether to obey or disobey those behavioral commandments. The divine will in the second category is not that they must do it by force, but that they ought to do it by choice, and they will ultimately be judged on what they chose.
Okay, let me stop you there because I want to make sure I'm fully grasping this distinction, and I actually want to push back a little bit on this.
Sure, go for it.
If the text uses words like decree or will for both things, isn't that just fundamentally confusing? I mean, if a king decrees something, he expects it to be done. Why use the exact same framework for a rock falling and a human telling the truth if the human can just ignore it?
It's a fair question. The reason is that the ultimate source of both laws is the same sovereign entity.
Oh, I see.
The text uses the same root concepts to emphasize that God is the author of both the physical laws of the universe and the moral laws of human society. The difference lies not in the authority of the lawgiver, but in the nature of the subject receiving the law.
Right.
The rock receives a deterministic law because it is a rock. The human receives a moral law because they possess consciousness.
Okay, I'm tracking with you now. If we pull this out of abstract theology and put it into an everyday modern context, it's really the difference between gravity and a speed limit.
Oh, that is a very grounded way to look at it. Walk me through how you see that playing out.
Well, okay, think about driving a car down the highway.
Okay.
Gravity is the formative law.
Yeah.
It's the deterministic decree. You, your car, the tires, the asphalt, you're all entirely submissive to gravity. You cannot choose to float your sedan 3 feet off the ground just because you feel like it.
Right. You have no choice.
You don't get a vote. You're strictly obedient. But a speed limit is a behavioral law. The state authority decrees that you should drive 55 miles per hour. They literally put up a giant sign that says, speed limit 55. That is the decree.
Yes.
But here's the catch. The same authority that built the highway also allowed car manufacturers to build an engine capable of doing 120 miles per hour.
Exactly.
And you have a foot capable of pressing the gas pedal to the floor. You have the physical capacity and the absolute freedom to hit 85 miles per hour and ignore the sign completely.
It's an excellent analogy. The authority desires you to drive 55 for the sake of harmony and safety, but they permit you the physical capacity to drive 85, which means your choice to obey the speed limit is actually meaningful.
Exactly. I mean, if the car was physically governed by a computer chip to never, ever exceed 55 miles per hour, you couldn't be praised as a law-abiding citizen. You wouldn't be a moral person. You'd just be a machine following its programming.
Right. There's no virtue in that.
You can only be tested and subsequently held accountable if you genuinely have the capacity to break the rule in the first place.
And this is exactly the profound so what that Dr. Ara is driving at for the reader. If you understand this linguistic distinction between the two types of decree, you realize that human rebellion in the text isn't a failure of universal design.
It's not a glitch.
No, it is not a glitch in the divine matrix. The human capacity to rebel is the exact feature that makes the entire system of morality work.
Wow. So the capacity for chaos is actually required for true obedience to exist.
Precisely. Without the capacity for disobedience, human free will is an illusion. Without free will, moral accountability is a logical impossibility. And without accountability, the concept of ultimate justice, which, in the form of a day of judgment, is entirely central to the Quranic narrative, that would just be a farce.
Right. How can you judge someone who had no choice?
Exactly. How can a judge condemn a rock for falling? Or praise a planet for orbiting? They can't. You can only judge a human for choosing to act unjustly when they possess the total freedom to act justly.
So to wrap up this first puzzle, reading the word obedient as this flat, one-dimensional word across the entire text is the mistake.
Yes, that's the error.
When the text says the universe is obedient, it means deterministic obedience to physics. When it highlights humans rebelling against behavioral laws, it is showcasing the unique, terrifying freedom granted only to conscious agents.
Exactly.
We're dealing with two entirely different domains of law, and applying the rules of one to the other is just bad textual analysis.
Exactly. Recognizing those different domains, asking yourself which set of rules is operating in this specific verse, is the foundational step in reading ancient texts with any sort of sophistication.
Okay, that shifts the perspective beautifully. But it also raises a massive follow-up question.
Let's hear it.
If the rules governing the physical universe operate differently than the rules governing human behavior, what happens when we look at the universe's ultimate physical constraint?
Oh.
What happens when we look at time? Because if there's one thing that causes modern readers to aggressively reject ancient texts, it is the timeline.
Oh, absolutely.
The perceived clash between cosmic history and ancient scriptures.
Yes. The age of the universe is arguably the most famous area of friction between modern science and ancient scripture across almost all religious traditions.
So let's lay out the specific misconception from Dr. Amara's source material. Modern science, astrophysics, geology, the study of cosmic microwave background radiation, it all tells us the universe took roughly 13.8 billion years to form.
Right, deep time.
Staggering deep time. The slow cooling of primordial gases, the accretion of planets, the eventual emergence of evolutionary biology. But the text, in several different surahs, I mean, Dr. Amara points to Al-Araf, Yunus, Hud, Al-Furqan, and others, it famously references the creation of the heavens and the earth happening in 6 days.
Right, a concept very familiar to anyone who knows the biblical book of Genesis as well, the famous 6 days of creation.
Exactly. And for the modern critic, it's an open and shut case.
Yeah.
Billions of years versus 144 hours.
Yeah.
Science wins, the text is a primitive myth. But then on top of that, and this is the part of Dr. Amar's analysis that really hooked me, there's a specific passage in Surah Fusilat that seems to feature a massive, embarrassing math error.
Oh, yes. The math problem.
It breaks down the sequence of creation, and if you add up the days mentioned in the text, it seems to equal 8 days, not 6.
Right. The text mentions creating the earth in 2 days, placing mountains and measuring out sustenance in 4 days, and then forming the heavens in 2 days. 2 plus 4 plus 2 equals 8.
So we are dealing with a double-barreled problem here for this deep dive, a scientific problem. 6 days versus billions of years. And an internal mathematical contradiction. The text claims 6 days overall, but the granular breakdown adds up to 8. Let's tackle the scientific one first.
Okay.
How does Dr. Amara reconcile a 6-day creation with a 14 billion-year-old universe without just dismissing the science entirely.
He does it by proving that the concept of a day in the divine cosmic context of the Quran is absolutely not a 24-hour earthly rotation.
Okay.
And what is vital here is that he doesn't just assert this as a convenient modern excuse to dodge astrophysics. You know, he doesn't just say, well, we have to make it fit.
Right, moving the goalposts.
Exactly. He actually proves it using the text's own internal logic and vocabulary.
So the text itself defines time differently. Show me the evidence for that.
The Quran repeatedly and explicitly demonstrates the relativity of time. It shows, through various narratives, that time is experienced entirely differently depending on your state of being or your position relative to the divine. Dr. Amara points to 3 distinct examples to establish this baseline. First, there is the story in Surah Al-Baqarah of a man who dies or is put into a death-like stasis for 100 years.
Right.
The text says God causes him to die for a century, then resurrects him. When he wakes up, he is asked how long he thinks he has been there. He looks around, sees his food hasn't spoiled, and replies, "A day, or part of a day."
Wow. So to human consciousness outside of the normal waking state, an entire century was experienced as a mere afternoon nap.
Exactly. Time is entirely subjective to the observer. Second, there is the famous story of the sleepers of the cave in Surah Al-Kahf.
Oh, I've heard of this one.
Yeah. These are young men who flee religious persecution, retreat to a cave, and miraculously fall asleep. When they wake up, they ask each other how long they slept, and again, they assume it was just a day or a fraction of a day.
Right.
But the text explicitly states for the reader that they were asleep for 300 solar years, which it actually clarifies is 309 lunar years.
Okay, so the text is highly aware of astronomical time measurements, but contrasts that heavily with human psychological time. What's the third example?
The third example takes psychological time and scales it up to a massive cosmic level. The text describes the Day of Judgment. It says that when people are resurrected and face the terrifying reality of eternity, they will look back at their entire earthly lives. Decades of existence, childhood, adulthood, old age.
Yeah.
And it will feel to them as though they had only lived on Earth for 10 days, or even just a single afternoon.
So Dr. Amore is showing that long before Einstein formalized the theory of relativity, this text was operating on the basic premise that time is bendable, it's subjective, and it's completely relative to the observer state.
Yes, but the definitive proof regarding the 6 days of creation comes from Surah Al-Hajj, verse 47.
Okay, what does that say?
The text explicitly states, "A day with your Lord is like 1,000 years of your reckoning." Now, the linguistic marker here is paramount. It uses the Arabic prefix ka, which means like or as. It says ka alfisanatin, like 1,000 years. Classical scholars have long understood that this is not establishing a literal 1 to 1,000 exchange rate. It is an ancient idiom.
Right.
It is using 1,000 metaphorically to indicate a vast, unfathomable expanse of time that human mathematics in the 7th century Arabian Peninsula simply didn't have the vocabulary to quantify.
It's ancient hyperbole for an extraordinarily long time. Like when I say, I've been waiting in line at the DMV for 1,000,000 years,
Yeah.
I don't mean a literal 1,000,000 years. I mean an agonizingly long epoch.
Exactly. So when an ancient text says a divine day is an era beyond human comprehension, it actually aligns beautifully with modern physics.
It really does.
When astrophysicists talk about light years or when they discuss the relativity of time depending on mass, gravity, and velocity, they are using modern mathematics to describe the exact same phenomenon.
Right.
Time is not absolute. A 24-hour day is a highly localized phenomenon based entirely on a single tiny rock spinning on its axis near an average-sized yellow star.
Yeah.
To take that localized 24-hour earthly metric and apply it to the creation of the entire cosmos is to fundamentally misunderstand both modern science and the ancient text.
It's like trying to measure the distance between the Milky Way and the Andromeda Galaxy using a plastic ruler you bought at a middle school book fair.
That is a phenomenal way to conceptualize it, yes.
You are just using the completely wrong instrument for the scale of the phenomenon you're observing.
Exactly. The 6 days mentioned in the text are 6 epochs, 6 massive, distinct eras of cosmic and geological development, the actual lengths of which are known only to the Creator.
Okay, the relativity of time makes total sense. I am fully on board with 6 eras, or 6 epochs, instead of 6 24-hour periods. But
The math.
I still need you to answer for this math problem.
Right. The breakdown in Surah Fussilat.
Yes, because whether you call them epochs, eras, or days, the math still has to math.
It does.
The text explicitly says God created the earth in 2 days. Then, in the very next verse, it says, he placed mountains on it and measured out its sustenance in 4 days.
Right.
And then it says, he created the 7 heavens in 2 days. Epochs or not. 2 plus 4 plus 2 is 8.
It is 8.
But the Quran repeatedly, in multiple other chapters, says the whole thing took 6. This isn't just relativity anymore. This looks like a blatant contradiction. If I'm a critic, I'm saying, look, they just made a mistake, and now modern scholars are doing fuzzy math to cover it up. How does Dr. Amara solve this without just making excuses?
He solves it by demonstrating that we are misreading the grammar.
Grammar, okay.
Yes. He relies on classical Arabic linguistics, specifically a structural concept utilized by legendary historical scholars like al-Qurtubi and al-Zamakhshari.
Okay.
And keep in mind, these are scholars who are analyzing this text centuries before modern science forced the issue. The concept hinges on a linguistic tool called fathalaka.
Fathalaka. Okay. What does that mean in practical terms?
It essentially means summarizing or giving the total sum of an overlapping sequence.
An overlapping sequence. Okay. Explain how al-Qurtubi maps this out on the actual text.
Al-Qurtubi points out that when the text says in 4 days, regarding the placement of mountains and sustenance, it is not saying in an additional 4 days. It means in 4 days total. The 4 days mentioned for the mountains and sustenance actually includes the first 2 days of the Earth's initial formation.
Wait, I need an analogy here. Help me visualize this, because my brain automatically wants to add them linearly. First 2, then 4, then 2.
Sure. Dr. Amara provides a great classical analogy, but let's update it for a modern listener. Imagine you are planning a massive cross-country road trip across the United States.
Okay. Let's say I'm driving from New York to Los Angeles.
Exactly. Now, suppose I ask you about your itinerary, and you tell me, I drove from New York to Chicago in 2 days, and I reached Denver in 4 days.
Right.
If you say that to me, you do not mean you drove for 2 days to get to Chicago, and then drove for an additional 4 days from Chicago to Denver, making 6 days total.
Right, right.
I would instantly understand that you meant the entire trip from New York all the way to Denver took 4 days. Reaching Chicago was simply a 2-day milestone along the overlapping timeline.
Oh, I see it. The first 2 days are subsumed into the 4 days. The timeline is running concurrently.
Precisely. Now apply that exact linguistic framework to the Quranic verses. Phase 1. It took 2 epochs to build the foundation of the Earth, so New York to Chicago.
Right.
Phase 2. It took 4 epochs total to finish the earthly project, with mountains and sustenance New York to Denver.
Okay.
Then you spent 2 additional epochs creating the heavens, driving from Denver to Los Angeles. So 4 epochs total for the Earth, plus 2 epochs for the heavens equals 6 epochs total.
It's a project management timeline.
Exactly.
If phase 1 takes 2 days, and phase 2 runs concurrently, and the whole earthly block finishes on day 4, the total elapsed time for that block is 4 days, not 6. Add phase 3, which is the heavens, taking 2 days, and you arrive flawlessly at 6 days total.
You do.
The math works perfectly, but only if you understand the specific idiom being used.
And this is exactly what al-Zamakhshari meant when he analyzed this text hundreds of years ago. He said the phrasing is a fathalaka, a final tally inserted to ensure the listener understands that the total duration of the earthly phase was exactly 4 days, without adding them cumulatively. It prevents the reader from assuming the Earth took longer than it actually did.
Wow. It is genuinely amazing how arrogance trips up modern readers. We approach ancient texts and read them literally, applying our modern, linear, bullet point assumptions to their language.
Right. We assume they spoke just like us.
And when it doesn't map perfectly, we don't say, I wonder what grammatical structure I'm missing. We say, these ancient people couldn't do basic addition. We invent contradictions where absolutely none exist, simply because we don't speak their linguistic idioms.
It's the equivalent of a future historian reading a 21st century text that says, I laugh my hat off, and writing a serious scholarly paper on the bizarre epidemic of spontaneous decapitation in the year 2024. If you don't know the idiom, you will butcher the history. Which is actually the perfect bridge to our next puzzle. Because if taking idioms literally creates false math problems, taking titles literally creates massive historical problems.
Okay, let's dive into that. This brings us to the third puzzle for today: clashing histories, names, titles, and the biblical record. We're moving from cosmic time down to the dirt of human historical records.
This is where we really get into the weeds of historical documentation and where texts are subjected to the harshest scrutiny by critics.
So here's the anomaly Dr. Amara introduces. The Quran uses names for very famous historical figures that differ entirely from the older, established biblical accounts in the Torah.
Right.
And critics point to this and say, look, The Quran was written centuries later. It didn't have access to the original archives, so it just got the history wrong. It blatantly contradicts the older established record.
Give me the two specific historical examples Dr. Amara addresses in this section.
Okay, first, the father of the prophet Abraham. In the biblical book of Genesis, Abraham's father is clearly named Terah.
Right.
But in the Quran, Abraham's father is referred to as Azar. Second, the story of Joseph in Egypt. In the Bible, the Egyptian man who buys Joseph out of slavery is named Potiphar. But in the Quran, he's referred to as the Aziz. Terah versus Azar, Potiphar versus Aziz. It looks like a clear, undeniable historical clash. Someone just has the wrong names.
This raises a really vital question about how we view source material and the assumptions we make about correctness.
Well,
Now, Dr. Amar starts by laying out a baseline theological premise just for context here.
okay.
Islamic theology views the Quran as the final, divinely preserved standard. It argues that older texts, like the Torah and the Gospels, while originally divine, suffered from centuries of translation errors, transcription mistakes, and human alterations.
Right.
So for a classical Muslim theologian, if the Quran and the Bible disagree on a name, the Quran is simply correcting the corrupted historical record. End of story.
Right. That's the theological trump card. My book is right, your book is wrong.
Yeah.
But as we established at the start, we aren't here for theological trump cards. We are here for historical and linguistic analysis.
Exactly.
How does Dr. Amara explain the discrepancy intellectually without just relying on faith?
By moving entirely past the theology and digging into the anthropology and linguistics of the ancient Near East. Let's look at Abraham's father first. Azar versus Terah.
Okay.
What is fascinating here, and what usually surprises critics, is that classical Islamic scholars, the historians and exegetes from 1,000 years ago, actually agree with the biblical record on the biological name. They readily acknowledge his birth name was Terah.
Hold on. If the classical Islamic scholars admit his biological name was Terah, doesn't that prove the critics right?
How so?
Well, doesn't that mean the author of the Quran just made a mistake, called him Azar, and then later scholars are just doing rhetorical gymnastics to cover it up?
It would look that way if we assume ancient societies functioned like modern bureaucracies, where a person only has one valid identifier, their birth certificate name.
Oh, I see.
But in the ancient world, people, especially those in significant positions of power or religious authority, were rarely known simply by their biological birth names. They were known by their titles, their functions, or their epithets. The scholars posit several highly plausible historical explanations for the use of Azar.
Okay, let's go through the theories. How do we get from Terah to Azar?
The first theory relies on metonymy. According to historical tradition, Terah wasn't just a casual pagan citizen. He was deeply involved in the systemic idolatry of King Nimrod's court. He was an elite.
Okay.
The theory suggests that Azar was the name of a specific, highly prominent idol that Terah was uniquely responsible for carving, keeping, or worshipping. By calling him Azar in the text, it is a linguistic metonymy replacing his name with the object he is most famously associated with. It's a rhetorical device used to highlight his spiritual identity and his opposition to his son's monotheism, elevating that over his mere biological identity.
It's descriptive. It's
Yeah.
like if we have a corrupt Wall Street banker named John Smith, and a historian writes a book about him and constantly refers to him as Mr. Greed,
Yes.
or, calling a famous mobster Scarface instead of Al Capone. It's a moniker that tells you who he was, not just what his mom named him.
Exactly. The second theory builds on that, suggesting that Azar was a formal bureaucratic title he earned in the royal court. He was essentially the minister of idolatry, the king's chief idol keeper.
Okay, I could see a bureaucratic title overriding a birth name. What is the third theory?
The third theory is deeply rooted in linguistics. Etymologists suggest that Azar might be derived from a non-Arabic, ancient Near Eastern root word meaning helper or supporter. In this context, he was the primary helper and institutional supporter of the idols against Abraham's monotheistic rebellion. And Dr. Amara brings in an incredible piece of comparative ancient history to support this. He notes that in ancient Egyptian religious pantheons, the name of the prominent god Osiris translates to the strong helper or the mighty supporter.
Oh, wow. So Azar can simply be a localized linguistic variation of a widespread ancient title used across the region for a religious supporter or patron.
Precisely. The overarching point is this. Azar is a descriptive title, a societal role, or a religious epithet. Terah is the biological birth name.
Right.
There is zero contradiction here. One text gives you the name on his birth certificate. The other text uses his job description to make a thematic point about idolatry.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense for Abraham's father. But what about Joseph's owner in Egypt? Potiphar versus the Aziz, is that the exact same phenomenon of a title overriding a name?
It is, and it is actually even simpler and more historically verifiable. This is a classic textbook case of a reader confusing a proper noun with a political office.
Break that down for me.
According to historical linguistic analysis, Potiphar was indeed the man's actual biological name. We even know his job title from the Hebrew records. He was the captain of the guard or the head of the police for the pharaoh.
Okay, so Potiphar's the guy's name. Where on earth does Aziz come from?
Al-Aziz, in classical Arabic, is not a personal name. It is a high-ranking political title.
Oh,
It translates to the mighty, the powerful, or effectively the minister or the governor. The Quran is simply referring to him by his high-ranking governmental title, while the Bible refers to him by his personal name.
so this is literally like reading two different history books about World War II.
Yes, exactly.
You open Book A, and it says, in 1940, Winston Churchill gave a speech to rally the British people. Then you open Book B, and it says, in 1940, the Prime Minister gave a speech to rally the British people. If you are an alien visiting Earth, or a historian 3,000 years in the future, and you don't know anything about the structure of the British government, you might say, aha! A glaring contradiction. One book says it was a guy named Churchill, the other says it was a guy named Prime Minister. Which is it?
That is the exact trap amateur critics fall into when analyzing these ancient texts. If you don't know that Aziz means prime minister or governor, you mistakenly assume it's a completely different guy named Aziz.
Right.
We confuse titles for names all the time in historical analysis. Think about the most famous Egyptian title, Pharaoh. Pharaoh wasn't a guy's first name.
Right. Ramses was the name.
Yes, Ramses, Tutankhamun. Pharaoh was just the title, meaning great house.
Right. Or Caesar in Rome.
Yeah.
Or Tsar in Russia. We use the title interchangeably with the man.
Exactly. So Dr. Amara is demonstrating that the Quran isn't making a historical error at all. It's deliberately choosing to identify the man by his function and his massive power in society, the Aziz. And from a literary perspective, that is incredibly fitting for the narrative.
Also,
It's a story about a powerless, imprisoned slave Joseph interacting with the absolute highest echelons of state power. Calling him the mighty emphasizes the power dynamic much more than just using his first name.
I love how these apparent contradictions actually force us to become better, more nuanced historians.
They really do.
We have to understand metonymy, we have to understand the difference between birth names and state titles, and we have to understand literary themes. It's not muddy waters because the text is flawed. It's muddy because human society is incredibly complex, and these texts reflect that complexity.
It demands that the reader step out of their modern literalist framework and actually enter the socio-political reality of the ancient Near East.
Okay, confusing a title for a name is an easy mistake for a reader to make. But what happens when a text seems to confuse two entirely different people who lived over 1,000 years apart?
The big one.
That leads us to our final puzzle for this deep dive, the Sister of Aaron anachronism. And I have to admit, when I first read the source material for this episode, this one seemed completely impossible to resolve.
It is arguably the most famous, most frequently cited, and seemingly most glaring historical anachronism raised against the Quran.
Let's lay out the timeline clash for the listener. In Surah Maryam, the text is talking about Mary, the mother of Jesus.
Right.
And it refers to her using the specific phrase, the sister of Aaron. Now, anyone with even a basic Sunday school understanding of biblical history knows there's a massive, gaping timeline problem here. The famous Aaron the prophet, the brother of Moses, lived during the Exodus from Egypt. Historically, that's roughly around 1300 or 1400 BCE.
Exactly.
Mary, the mother of Jesus, lived in the 1st century CE. They are separated by at least 13 to 14 centuries.
Right. So to a critic, it looks like the author of the Quran simply got confused. They matched up Mary, the mother of Jesus, with Miriam, the sister of Moses and Aaron. Because in Arabic and Hebrew, the names Mary and Miriam are essentially the exact same word, Miriam.
Exactly. It looks like the most embarrassing historical mix-up of all time. Oh, there's a famous Miriam with a brother named Aaron, and there's a famous Mary with a son named Jesus. They both have the same name. They must be the same person.
It seems like an obvious blunder.
How does Dr. Amara defend this? Because on the surface, it looks completely indefensible.
He defends it by applying the most basic, foundational, yet most frequently overlooked rule of reading comprehension. You have to identify who is speaking in the text.
Identify the speaker. Okay, explain that.
Critics approach this verse assuming that the Quran, in its own omniscient divine narrative voice, is declaring as a matter of historical fact that Mary is the biological sister of the prophet Aaron.
Right.
But if we actually read the broader text, we see that the Quran knows exactly who Mary is. In a different chapter, Surah At-Tarim, verse 12, it explicitly identifies her true, accurate lineage. It calls her Maryam, daughter of Imran.
Okay.
Furthermore, it establishes her lineage as coming from the line of David and Judah, not from the Levite line of Aaron and Moses.
So the text internally proves that it knows her actual father, her actual tribal lineage, and her actual place in history. It knows she's not Moses' sister.
Yes, the text is internally consistent on her genealogy. So, the question becomes, why does Surah Maryam, verse 28, say, "O sister of Aaron"? The breakthrough insight is identifying the invisible quotation marks.
Invisible quotation marks.
That the Quran is not calling her that in its narrative voice. The Quran is quoting the dialogue of an angry mob. It is quoting the people who confronted Mary when she returned to her town carrying a newborn baby.
Oh. We have to visualize the context of the scene. She has just given birth miraculously. She walks back into her conservative religious hometown with the infant Jesus in her arms, and the townspeople are absolutely horrified because she is unmarried.
Exactly. The verse reads, "They said, 'O Mary, you have certainly done a thing unprecedented. O sister of Aaron, your father was not a man of evil, nor was your mother unchaste.'" It is pure dialogue.
Wow.
It is a direct quote of the insults and the shock being hurled at her by the crowd.
Okay, I see the quotation marks now. That shifts the blame from the author to the crowd. But, well, that just moves the question one step back.
Yeah.
Why would the crowd call her the sister of Aaron? Did the crowd think she was 1,400 years old?
Of course not. Dr. Amara details 3 specific theories compiled by classical commentators like al-Qurtubi and al-Zamakhshari, explaining why the ancient mob used this exact phrase. And all 3 theories revolve around understanding local idiom, sociology, and crowd psychology.
Let's hear the theories. Why did the mob say this?
Theory number 1. Aaron was a notoriously wicked man of their own specific era.
Okay.
The classical commentators suggest there may have been a well-known, highly corrupt individual in their town or region named Aaron. By calling her the sister of Aaron, the mob was using a localized idiom of guilt by association. They were saying, "You are acting just like that degenerate Aaron." It was a cultural shorthand for someone who brings deep shame to the community.
Oh, like saying you're acting like a real Benedict Arnold. You aren't literally saying the person is the biological sibling of an 18th century traitor. You are using the name as a synonym for betrayal.
Yes, exactly. A highly localized temporal cultural reference.
Okay, I buy that. What is the second theory?
The second theory is brilliant, and it revolves around heavy, cutting, psychological sarcasm.
Sarcasm.
In Jewish tradition, Aaron, the prophet Moses' brother, was the ultimate supreme symbol of piety, priesthood, and religious purity. The entire priestly class, the Levites, traced their authority and lineage back to him. Now, Mary herself was known before this pregnancy event as a deeply pious girl, totally dedicated to the temple and to worship.
So the crowd is using the name of the most holy man in their history, too.
Yes. They are viciously mocking her. They're saying, "Oh, look at you, the sister of Aaron. Look at you pretending to be so incredibly holy, so pious, so dedicated to the temple, and yet you show up here with a child out of wedlock." It was a deeply sarcastic, mocking way to highlight the perceived massive hypocrisy of her situation. Calling her sister of Aaron was the ancient equivalent of calling someone Miss Perfect or Mother Teresa when they get caught doing something scandalous.
Oh my goodness, that completely changes everything about how we read ancient text. It is exactly like if someone today drops a huge tray of glasses in a quiet, crowded restaurant, and someone in the back sarcastically yells out, "Great job, Einstein."
That is the perfect modern equivalent.
Think about the implications of that. If an archaeologist or a historian 2,000 years from now digs up a written transcript of that restaurant interaction, and they read it with flat, literalist precision, they will think, wow, the people of the 21st century were incredibly stupid. They believe that Albert Einstein, the famous theoretical physicist who died in 1955, somehow time-traveled and worked as a clumsy waiter at an Olive Garden.
Because they missed the tone, they missed the sociology, they missed the sarcasm. They are reading a highly charged, emotional human exchange as if it were a dry, literal, encyclopedic chronicle of facts.
That is incredible. And what's the third theory, just to round it out?
The third theory is the most literal, but still linguistically and historically plausible. It suggests that Mary actually had a biological brother whose name was Aaron.
Really?
Aaron, or Harun in Arabic, was an incredibly common name among the Israelites, just as it remains today. If she had a brother named Aaron, who was widely known in the community for being a good, upright citizen, the crowd might have simply been using her own good family name to shame her. Your brother Aaron is so good, your father wasn't evil, your mother wasn't unchaste. How could you do this and ruin the family name?
All three of those theories, a local idiom for a bad guy, heavy sarcasm using a prophet's name, or just a literal brother named Aaron, make infinitely more sense than assuming the author of the text just accidentally mashed together two women who lived 1,400 years apart, especially when the text proves elsewhere that it knows her exact lineage.
And this, right here, is the ultimate so what for the listener. This is why Dr. Amar's book is so vital for anyone studying theology, history, or literature. Reading ancient texts requires so much more than just a dictionary and a timeline.
Right.
It requires deep empathy. It requires an understanding of dialogue, idiom, cultural context, and the messy reality of human psychology. You have to understand that these texts are recording the speech of angry mobs, sarcastic townspeople, and idiomatic expressions. If you strip all the humanity, emotion, and tone out of the text and read it like a sterile computer program, you will find contradictions everywhere.
You're trying to use an X-ray machine on a Picasso painting.
Yeah.
It's the wrong tool for the medium.
Exactly. You are demanding flat literalism from a text that is purposefully conveying complex human realities through metaphor, idiom, and dialogue.
This has been an absolutely phenomenal, mind-bending journey. Let's summarize what we've uncovered today in this deep dive into Dr. Amar's methodology.
Yes.
We started by confronting a philosophical paradox. How can the universe be perfectly obedient while humans constantly rebel? And we discovered that there is no paradox, only two different domains of divine decree.
Right, the deterministic versus the behavioral.
The deterministic laws of physis kata takini, which we cannot break, and the behavioral laws kata takiri, which we are granted the absolute free will to break. We learned that the capacity for rebellion isn't a glitch. It is the necessary feature that makes our ultimate moral accountability actually mean something. The speed limit versus gravity.
A vital paradigm-shifting distinction for understanding the nature of justice and free will in these texts.
Then, we move from cosmic laws to cosmic time. The 6 days of creation versus a billions of years old universe.
Yeah.
We saw how the text itself proves time is relative to the observer, that a divine day is like 1,000 years of our reckoning. It's an epoch, an era, not a 24-hour spin of the earth. And we resolve the mathematical puzzle of the 8 days by understanding the classical linguistic concept of fatalaka, that ancient Arabic often stated the total overlapping time of a project, not the cumulative linear addition. The New York to Denver road trip.
Showing us that we cannot arrogantly impose our modern linear assumptions onto ancient, sophisticated linguistic structures.
From there, we dove into historical records. Why does the Quran say Azar and Aziz when the Bible says Terah and Potiphar? We learned that ancient history often recorded people by their prominent titles, their allegiances, and their societal roles, rather than the names on their birth certificates. Churchill versus the Prime Minister.
Reminding us that historical identity is multifaceted, and different texts emphasize different facets for thematic reasons.
And finally, the ultimate historical anachronism. Mary as the sister of Aaron. A 1,400-year mistake. No. A direct quote of a sarcastic, angry mob using an idiom to mock a woman they believed was a hypocrite. Great job, Einstein.
And through all of these examples, the underlying lesson is exceptionally clear. True textual analysis requires intellectual humility. It requires us to admit that we might not immediately grasp the idiom, the tone, or the cultural context of a world that existed millennia before we were born.
Which leaves me with a final, slightly terrifying, but highly provocative thought for you to mull over as you go about your day.
Oh, here we go.
We've just spent this entire deep dive seeing how much of ancient history, theology, and our judgment of these texts relies on deciphering idioms, political titles, and the sarcastic tone of angry crowds. We've seen how easily a sarcastic, emotional comment can be misread as a catastrophic historical error if you don't understand the inside joke.
Yeah, the tone is everything.
So think about the massive digital footprint we are leaving behind today. Think about your text messages, your tweets, your memes, your group chats. Think about how much slang, irony, and thick sarcasm you use every single day. If a team of archaeologists unearths the servers holding your family group chat 3,000 years from now, and they read it with the same rigid, flat, humorless literalism that critics often apply to ancient texts, What hilarious or bizarre contradictions will they accuse you of?
That is a terrifying thought.
Will they think you actually believed Albert Einstein was a waiter? Will they think a keyboard warrior was an actual decorated military rank in the 21st century? Will they assume you literally died laughing?
Probably.
When we read the past, we are looking into muddy waters. The X-ray machine doesn't work here. We have to look closer, we have to listen harder, and we have to remember that there were real, complex, emotional humans on the other side of those words. Thank you so much for joining us on this intellectual journey today. Keep questioning your assumptions, keep reading deeply, and most importantly, keep learning. Until next time.